Are you frustrated with getting random drop stitches while using your Sentro circulating machine? You are not alone, and I have definitely had my fair share of drop stitches. The trick is figuring out what is causing the drop stitches so I was able to fix them, and it can be a few different things. So the first thing is knowing how the machine works. When you are cranking out your rows on the machine, the yarn that's going from the yarn tensioner up and through the yarn holder, as you crank the machine around, those needles hook down and grab onto the yarn and pull it down into the two small pegs. The drop stitch is happening because the hook is not grabbing onto the yarn as it's coming through the yarn holder for some reason. So what could be the cause of this? The first thing I always check is to make sure I have a really good cast on, because that's the foundation for your entire project. I like to start at my white needle and I hook the yarn under the white needle, and then I crank forward and go over the next needle. And you don't want it overly tight. This will bind up your machine, and you don't want it too loose. If it's too loose, then you can get drop stitches as well. So you just want it to be just right. So we're kind of like Goldilocks here. We don't want it too loose. We don't want it too tight. We want it just right. I call it kind of like kissing the front and back side of every other needle. And we do this every other all the way around until we get back to our white needle. And at this point, you want to make sure you're not going under two needles or you're not going over two needles. It's every other one on the back and then on the front. If you go under two in a row or over two in a row, you'll also get a drop stitch as you start to crank your rows because it can't lock the knit stitches into place. Also, as you're doing your cast on, the needles that you're going under with, you want to make sure that it's catching that yarn and it's pulling it down in between the two pegs. So once you get back to your white needle, here is what the cast on should look like on your machine, just having the cast on with no additional rows. It should be over and under each needle all the way around. So it looks like this. Again, if you find that you skipped a needle and you've gone over two or have gone under two, you want to remove the yarn and redo your cast on. Before we go to crank our first row, you also want to check to make sure your yarn is not stuck on top of the big pegs like this. If any of them are, you want to push it down and under because you can get a drop stitch that way too if it's stuck on top of those big pegs. And this is at any point when you're cranking out the rows. Before we begin our first row, let's talk about our yarn holder. So I stopped this row at my 47th needle because my 48th needle is where I started. So I don't want to put the yarn underneath my 48th needle yet. First, it needs to go into the yarn holder. And you want the yarn to go from the front all the way to the back. And it kind of looks like a little tongue sticking out. If your yarn looks like this and is not all the way down into the front, the needles are not going to catch the yarn and you will also get drop stitches. So have it completely seated down to the front, all the way to the back, and then we're going to put it in the yarn tensioner. There are 3 holes. I usually like the middle hole for the number, a medium weight yarn like this. And then I like to put my yarn in a bowl on the floor in front of my machine. Now you can start cranking out the rows for your project. But you will notice with my left hand, I am not just relying on the tension holder, I'm using my left hand for tension. The tension holder I really just use as a guide for the yarn, and between my thumb and my pointer finger, I'm not holding it tightly down, I'm just giving it slight tension on the yarn. As we crank out rows, the yarn skein itself is going to have less and less yarn, so it's going to be creating less and less tension. So I use my left hand to compensate for that tension. Another thing is people sometimes add weight to their project to help pull the fabric down to keep all the fabric seated right on the machine. So in this video here, I was doing a panel and I used binder clips at the end. This was recommended to me by someone who was watching my live, and it worked really well. There's also a weighted cloth clips that you can buy on Amazon to hook that has like 4 or 5 hooks that look like this to help give a little bit of weight to your project fabric to keep it on the machine right. Another thing could be that your machine is moving around too much. I use these removable sticky glue pads that are silicone. I cut them in fourths and I put them to the suction cups on the bottom of my machine. And this helps it really adhere to my tabletop, even when I'm using my wooden one, so the machine can't move too much. I have been told if the machine is moving too much, then it makes it where the needles can't hook down or grab the yarn because it's missing that yarn. So this works really well. You can get it on Amazon, I think for a pack of 10, and then you just pull them on up. They don't leave any residue. You can wash them. They're reusable. And I just use the little film protective cover to put them back on the bottom. And these have been really great. Lastly, drop stitches can also happen when your fabric is too thick for the machine. This is a number 5 bulky weight yarn. This is my example. It's too thick for my machine, and you'll see as I start to crank it out, it will, after about probably row 8 or 9, it starts dropping a ton of stitches. So if you're having that problem, try just a thinner yarn and see if you can get that to work with no problems, because maybe it is just the yarn that you have tried to use. It is way too thick. I personally have never gotten a bulky number 5 weighted yarn to work on my machine. I always go to DK number 3 fingerling yarns, number 2s, and then also number 4 worsted weight yarns work really well. And I'll put a link in the video description below that shows yarn that I really like to use. But here's the example of it being too thick and dropping stitches, and I just had to remove it from the machine. Another thing that can happen is you will fix a drop stitch and then it just seems like that exact same one keeps popping off the machine. It keeps dropping. So in the rest of the video, I have stitched on my tutorial on how I fix a drop stitch. This is my drop stitch that has popped off of the needle and has dropped. So as you can see here, we have loops over these 2 small pegs. And this is what the machine normally has, but there's also a piece of yarn hooked under the needle. So when I crank this around, it pops that loop up and over the needle as the needle comes up. And then there's a new piece of yarn underneath the needle that goes down onto those 2 pegs, and it all gets like locked into place, making that knit stitch. But since I have a drop stitch, we want to fix this. So first thing I'm going to do when it gets to the yarn holder, I'm going to take the yarn and put it over the needle, because I don't want the needle grabbing any more yarn, because it will just start going in a loop and continue to drop stitches. Then I always like to fix the stitch when it's on the left side of my machine. So I crank it around until it gets almost back to the yarn holder, and then we're going to fix it. So I take my loom pick and remove if there is a loop around those 2 pegs, because we don't want that. And now there's no yarn underneath that needle as well anymore. And that's good. So we can now fix this loop. I take the loom pick to pick up the loop I do have, still intact with the stitches. Take my crochet hook and put it underneath those bars. Pick up the loop, put the bar over the loop, and then pull the loop over the bar. So bar over the loop, and then loop over the bar and the crochet hook. And we do this all the way till we get back up to the top. And this is how it's going to create the same looking knit stitches that the machine makes. That's why the crochet hook needs to be underneath. And so we're going to do this all the way up, take the bar over the loop. Now pull the loop up and over the bar and the crochet hook. That bar is now your new loop. And so I'll do this just a couple more times till all we're left with is a loop left on our crochet hook. And why I like doing this on the left side of the machine, if I do it on the right side of the machine, I'll start cranking my rows and I will forget that I had fixed the stitch and it will just drop it again. And I'll show you why. Here I'm at my last one where I take the loop, put it over the bar and the crochet hook. Now that I have this loop, I'm going to put this loop back on the 2 little pegs of this needle. And it's really easy to do this if you have a loom pick. If you don't have a loom pick, use a paper clip that you undo. So you have just something with a little bit of an angle to hold down the yarn over those pegs. If you don't hold this loop down as we crank it, it's just going to pull up the needle as we crank around, and it will pop that loop right off of the needle and the pegs. There's nothing for it to lock into, so it will just continue to drop your stitch again. So hold that loop down that you just put on, and now let the needle come up through that, keeping that loop down onto those 2 pegs. And then let the needle catch the new yarn through your yarn holder. And then now when that needle goes down, everything is going to be locked into place when it catches that needle. And then when you continue to crank your rows, everything is going to continue to lock in place and make the knit stitches. So that's why I do it on the left side before we get to the yarn holder, so I can just make sure I hold that loop down and then everything gets caught correctly and locked into place. If I fix the stitch on the right side of the yarn holder, I always seem to forget that I fixed the stitch, or I'll forget which needle I fixed the drop stitch on, and then the needle will come up, it will pop off that loop, and then I have the same issue and I am fixing drop stitches. I really hope this video helped with some ideas on why drop stitches can be happening and how to fix them. If you know of any other reasons why drop stitches are happening and how to fix them, please let me know in the comment section below, because I love learning from all of my fellow crafters. Thank you so much for watching, and happy crafting, everybody.